Hi everybody, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. It is time to take your questions, and we start with Patricia, who asks, "It's been months without a Governor General. What are some of the problems that are developing by that delay?" Um, so, a couple of things here is that the only real problems are on the kind of ceremonial side. Because we've got the administrator, who is the Chief Justice, signing off on all the day-to-day stuff is still moving, and that's what counts. That's the important part of the administrator's role. But what he doesn't do is all the ceremonial stuff. And this is what Professor Philippe Lagacé likes to call the head of nation stuff, which is the kind of stuff that makes about, the feeling good about Canada, and the kind of symbolic stuff that is all about unifying the country and all those kinds of things. So he's not really doing that. He's not doing any of the kind of patronage stuff that the Governor General would normally do. None of this is really mission critical, and the fact that we're still in the pandemic is kind of the saving grace there, because it's not like the Governor General would be touring at this point either, really. And the fact that we can be glad we haven't had any military deaths or anything like that require ramp ceremonies, because that would really be the Governor General's job as the Commander in Chief. So we haven't had those kind of situations come up, which we can be thankful for. And so that's why it's very minimally impacted on those other functions, but it's still better if we have a new Governor General as soon as possible. So we're just waiting to hear on what that process is looking like for the government. Our next question comes from Freethinker119 on the Twitter machine, who asks, "When is C-19 going to pass? Is it actually needed to have an election?" That is always a good question. We don't have any exact dates on when things will pass, but it did finally get referred to committee this last week. The Commons is not sitting this upcoming week, and so there is a possibility it could pass the House the week after, assuming that the committee deals with it in short order and the government is able to schedule third reading debate on it in short order. I don't know how likely that's going to be at this point, but that's kind of where we're at. There is an added hitch at the committee where it got sent to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, and they are in the middle of a weeks-long filibuster over the prorogation report, because the opposition members of the committee want to not only call the Prime Minister to explain his thinking in the report, but also a bunch of witnesses like the Kielburgers and the couple who run Speaker Spotlight, for some reason which does not make any real sense in the context of debating the prorogation report. And so the Liberals on the committee have been filibustering to protest that. And with this bill now going to that committee, it's a question of, will they be able to procedurally get it ahead of the ongoing business of the prorogation report and the filibuster happening there. We'll have to wait and see. That could be an additional wrench in those works. The only real upside of that is that once it is able to pass the House, it will be able to pass the Senate in very short order, because they are dealing with things very expeditiously these days. So that's where that kind of stands. As for, do they really need it? These are all things that the Chief Electoral Officer said that he needs in order to be able to safely hold an election during a pandemic. So that's extra voting days and enhanced ability to do mail-in ballots, things like that. So if we are to have an election anytime before really the fall, and even possibly later than that, then it would be pretty necessary. I don't see any particular triggers for said possible election between now and then, despite what the Bloc leader seems to think. So I really, really don't think there's going to be one. So this may wind up being moot by the time it gets passed and through its 90-day implementation period. But it's kind of a nice insurance policy to have because this is a hung parliament and theoretically it could fall at any time. Our next question comes from a different Patricia, this one Patricia Sutherland, also on the Twitter machine, who asks, how much of the government legislation or agenda has actually been sent to the Senate? How much is still in committee or being debated? So I went through Legisinfo and here's what I found. There are still 4 bills currently at second reading stage in the House of Commons. Technically 5, but one of those they've finished second reading, they want to send it to committee. The opposition is fighting over which committee to send it to, this being the Digital Privacy Bill. It should go to the Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics Committee. But that committee is still stuck on their witch hunt of We Charity issues, and they think that sending this bill to that committee is a distraction from that, even though privacy is in the actual title and mandate of that committee. So we're kind of seeing where that goes. That bill aside, there are another 5 bills at committee stage, and then another 5 which are at third reading stage, which could be passed at any particular time once they finally are able to come up in the House. And as for what's in the Senate, there is a single bill, which is a government bill which was initiated in the Senate, which is the proposed changes to the Parliament of Canada Act, which would basically entrench some of these new changes in the new Senate. I have strong feelings about this bill and about these particular changes that it's trying to entrench. I think the bill is probably doomed because it's not going to get any support from other parties on the House of Commons side once it finally reaches there. But otherwise, there are no other pieces of government legislation in the Senate currently. There are 2 bills which the Senate has been doing pre-study on. One of those is the UNDRIP bill. The other is the budget implementation bill. So those will enable those to get swifter passage once they do make it to the Senate. But otherwise, they've pretty much dispatched everything that's on their order paper because they've been very conscientious to get through things as much as possible in order to sit as little as possible, because that's how they think they're contributing to the pandemic response. I happen to think that that's possibly a bad move in the longer run, but those are my particular feelings. Our final question is from Alan Park, also on Twitter, who asks, having watched the various provincial stumbles and the hasty blame the feds responses, I wonder how much has changed in the federal-provincial balance of constitutional responsibilities during the pandemic. Of those changes, if any, how many of those will last? The short answer to that is there really haven't been any changes because the Constitution is the Constitution, and amending that is a very serious pain in the ass. So there really haven't been any changes to speak of. No Emergencies Act has been invoked in order to try and assert some kind of federal responsibility on it. I don't think it could even be invoked because none of the situations really rise to what the bill defines as a national emergency in terms of capacity or ability of provinces to deal with it. And a lack of political will is not a lack of capacity. So really not a lot has changed. Blame shifting is blame shifting, and that's not really a constitutional issue. It's a political issue that premiers think that they are able to get away with. I happen to think that they shouldn't get away with it, which is why I tend to call it out rather than some of my erstwhile media colleagues who will instead write things like finger pointing. But that's me. So really not a lot has actually changed. And that's kind of where the landscape is. Post-pandemic, I don't think too much is going to change either, unless I mean, what could change is if the federal government is able to get provinces to sign on to its plans around national standards for long-term care, and to a certain extent, its childcare plans, because then that would help create another broader national framework around how these things would work for post-pandemic life. But in terms of day-to-day responsibilities, really, we have not had any constitutional amendments, so nothing has really changed there. And that's everything for this week. Thanks for all the questions that you guys send in to me, and we will see you again next week. Don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.